When starting a new project for construction documents in Revit, there's a couple of things to consider, some of which are mentioned in Chapter 5 of our textbook, which kind of talks about the overall design process. And for us, we're not going to be going through some of the other phases of this sort of preliminary design, like bubble diagrams and adjacency matrices. Our goal in this project is to mimic what you might see and experience in an office, where a principal or a design team presents to you a preliminary space plan, and you, the project manager, has to basically make that plan kind of a reality, or at least an electronic reality at first. And these preliminary space plans, typically they are things which a principal may work through with a client to solve basic programmatic issues, and adjacencies and things like that. So, and then what often happens is it gets handed off to the project manager, and the project manager kind of has to figure out the implications at the sort of most intimate design level of those design decisions that are kind of sketched out in the preliminary plan. And an example of that might be right here in front of us. In our particular project, there is a front desk area, which you may be able to see at the top of the sketch. And that is a very, it's kind of the introduction to the project. It's how most people would arrive there. And it even mentions that there should be a custom tile pattern in that area. But what exactly that tile pattern is not worked out in advance. You want to, one, get client buy-in, but then you want to develop the project in kind of stages. You don't want to jump into the highest level of detail right away. Anyway, the book does talk about that in greater detail. So for us, when we convert our preliminary space plans and sections into a design project, a schematic design project, there's certain basic drawings that you typically develop first: the plans, sections, and elevations. And again, those have been kind of given to you as a general space plan. And what you'll need to do as the project manager is decide what sort of aesthetic approach am I going to have to this project? How am I going to make a project that represents Endicott College, and that also, perhaps relates to, I don't know, the history of swimming and natatoria and bathing. There's a very long history mentioned in the introductory lecture. But there's also, a lot of very wonderful modern facilities. And then there are facilities where they are, kind of a standard bearer for the campus that they represent. So anyway, the other purpose of these schematic plans, the sort of first stage of design, obviously you want to develop some three-dimensional sense of what the project looks like, and then you want to sort of in a general sense identify the scope and intent of the project. For example, where is the limit of construction or the limit of work? That early schematic stage allows you to get a cost estimate when you are, in an office, and but you need to identify all the pieces, all the demolition, all the new construction, all the special construction, all the custom elements, all the things which need to be sort of purchased. Anyway, the other thing to consider is that we need to develop some sort of design or theme, concept, or decorative motif. Concepts often are really great for helping you lay out a project. For example, if your concept is expansion or filtration, those are terrific, sort of, especially in the general stage. But now we are really going to be getting into the nitty-gritty of the exact details. We're going to be doing things like choosing door handles and floor drains and tile dimension and patterns. So those concepts, you'll need to come up with one that makes sense for this project. Obviously, it's for the Endicott goals, so that kind of presents itself as a pretty ready-made concept. But then you'll want to think through what implication does that have. The Endicott colors, green and blue, really don't have a lot to do with gulls. So you may want to come up with some kind of scheme. Or even just a graphic diagram, which is a guide for you as you approach all the different detailed decisions, which we'll come up with against this semester. Now, one other topic that I want to talk about before I show some Revit skills is what kind of drawings should you be thinking about at this stage? There is this tendency to want to be sort of photorealistic right from the get-go. Let me call up a couple of examples here. This page of presentation boards from my Pinterest account is on Canvas if you want to check it out yourself. But I've just saved some links of some presentations which I think are really good. And one of the things is a lot of these are exterior, so it's possible to be much more kind of cagey with exterior views. You can see here that there's a lot of sort of soft lighting and fuzzy materials. Sometimes it's a little harder to get away with that for interiors, but I think some of these projects do just that. They don't sort of obsess too much over the details of the interiors just yet. Early on, what you want to do is you want to express the kind of programmatic relationships in 3 dimensions, the kind of general color scheme, a general sense of the lighting in the project, but you don't want to kind of overdo it. Now, at this stage, you guys have had a number of different pieces of software that can help you. In this case, probably what you'll want to do is back off from some of the sort of overt and, obsessive photorealism of Revit, and perhaps use some Photoshop to soften the renderings so that they are still obviously representative of the interior. Oh, this guy's a little smaller than I thought. Still representative of the experience that you're trying to convey, but perhaps are filtered in a way that we are not obsessing over, geez, I don't like the size of the aggregate in that concrete countertop, or I don't like the edge detail on your terrazzo tile. What you want at this stage is to really kind of capture the overarching aesthetic of the project, the kind of impact that you're trying to go for. Is it a bright and airy space? Is it a sort of dark and introspective place? And then, from there, we will develop it in further detail. So anyway, there you go. That's kind of the goal of what we're shooting for at this stage. So now let's talk a little bit about Revit. Let me go over to my Revit page here. So the first thing to be aware of when you're starting a construction drawing set of documents is that in Revit, there are these things called phases. Now, if I go to the Manage ribbon, there is a section here called Phases. And what you'll see, if you use the construction drawing template, there are actually a lot of phases to worry about. For us, there are only 3: existing, new construction, and project completion. What having phases allows you to do is you could have one person drawing the existing conditions while someone else is working on the new construction plans. It sort of creates a time parameter within the Revit project. Anyway, there are a number of filters, so you can choose to show just everything. You can also show a completed project, or you can show, for example, demo, which is demolition, and you can just show the new stuff. So for us, if we wanted to create a demolition plan, we would obviously want to show demolition, the demolition phase, and the existing stuff, but we wouldn't want to show anything new. Okay. Now it's a little tricky in a new construction plan. What you want to do is show anything that wasn't demolished and the new stuff. So the typical phase used in new construction is called previous and new. And what you'll see here, what it indicates is anything that was created in the new phase is shown by category, which is kind of the normal way. Anything that's existing is shown also by its category. So if it has a material applied, the material should apply correctly, should appear as intended. Finally, the demolished things which are demolished, are not displayed. So that's most typical when you're working on a new construction plan, is that anything that's demolished disappears. The key thing here is what you need to do is tell Revit you're demolishing things. And the way to do that, I'm going to just click OK here. The way to do that, I'm gonna demolish some stuff. It's part of the fun part of my job here. I want to get rid of this door. It's part of my sketch to get rid of that door. The way that you demolish things, you go to the Modify ribbon, and there is, you guessed it, a Demolish tool right here. And it looks kind of like a hammer. And what it does is it takes an element and it changes it to indicate to Revit that something has been demolished. And of course, there's this lovely video going here, which will show you how the tool works. That won't look like it for us. What happens when I demolish this door, I'll click on it, it disappears. And in fact, if I kind of mouse around here, I could probably find that there's a little section of wall that has been filled in this wall. So Revit knows if you take out a door, it needs to fill that opening in. Okay, so that's how you use the Demolish tool. So again, I cannot emphasize enough, do not delete things. Use the Demolish tool for anything that needs to go away. And I believe on the first floor, there's some doors and there are some windows. Again, you get to use the Demolish tool as you go through your design plan. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, this project, you have a design plan. What I would strongly recommend is that as you go through the plan, you kind of yellow out what you have completed for the new construction. So the other thing that I find is really handy at this stage of design is using view templates to control the way poche looks in your project. So, and what I mean by that is in the schematic phase, you basically want everything to have a nice solid poche. Often you want it to kind of have a stylish look to it. Now, it is easy enough to use graphic overrides to control the appearance of walls and their cut pattern. And the way that you do that is you use your visibility and graphic overrides. Over here, VG, is the keyboard shortcut. And I could easily come down here and change all of the walls, for example, to have a cut pattern that is a cut pattern that I prefer, you know, gray or black or red. And I'll show you what that looks like. Here, I'll come over here and I'll change the color to here. Let's change it to a lovely. Let's go with green. I like green. I'm gonna green kind of leave here. And the pattern, I'll just use a solid fill. Okay, and apply. And okay, and what you see is that all the walls are now filled with green. One area where that can get a little tedious kind of changing the graphic overrides individually by view, is interior elevations. And one of the reasons is interior elevations it's just not a strong point of Revit. For example, here's an interior elevation of the main space, and you can see that it has left the roof, and it has also left the floor thickness, which is what we're seeing here. You typically don't want to see that. Also, very frequently with Revit, you'll want to do kind of interior elevations. You'll want to do a custom boundary. If there's for example, I don't know, a sloped ceiling, for example, you might want to draw the lines that represent that boundary of the sloped ceiling, because you don't want to show anything that is cut through. You can draw these unusual boundaries. Anyway, what this leads to is a couple of issues. First of all, you can use view templates to hide certain things that you don't want to see in interior elevation. We don't usually see these level markers. We don't usually see sections in interior elevation, so it would be worth setting up a template to hide those, which I can do. I can go to the view ribbon, click on view templates, and I'm going to manage view templates. So there are a couple already in your project you may have been unaware of. Oh, and look at that. The top one happens to be architectural elevation. And what we can do, we can use the same visibility and graphic overrides that we saw in floor plan. We can use those here to hide things we don't want to see. In this case, let's see, what don't we want to see? We don't want to see those interior elevation markers. Stretch that out. And the levels, right? So let's go to levels and turn those off, and section scope. Oops, no, not that. Sections, and hit apply and OK and OK. So now what we can do is apply that view template to this particular view. Scroll down here into my properties of my view, and just choose a view template, in this case the architectural elevation, and like magic, those unwanted section markers go away. And you might say, well, I could have just used visibility and graphic overrides for this particular view, but remember, for interiors projects, you often do dozens of interior elevations, so it's nice to use a template when you can. By the way, the other thing that is really nice is to get a good dark line around the perimeter of this interior elevation. The only way that I have found anyway to do that is to select the crop region here, the crop boundary, right-click on it, and from that context-sensitive menu, override the graphics by element. We have been overriding graphics by kind of category before. For some reason, this category is unavailable for overriding. Anyway, we can just come in here and choose a heavy line weight. 6 or 7 is pretty heavy. And okay. Even the line work tool will not work in this case. The line work tool will not work. So those are some features that you can use to kind of save time graphically. Some of you may prefer to use the section default view and use a section box and render elevations that way, kind of using Revit's rendering system. By this I mean, I'll show you, if I scroll up here, turn on the section box, and let's say we just crop away part of the project. Of course, we don't need to see any of that stuff in the other part of the building. And now if I go to this front view, well, this is an interior elevation, or I guess actually really it's a section. I could just hit the render button and render this. Obviously I'm not going to do that because I don't have anything in here and I don't have any lighting or any of that sort of stuff. But this is another way to get some solid graphics. Also, a third way is to just export this as an AutoCAD file and bring the AutoCAD file into something like Adobe Illustrator, and you can have at it with Adobe Illustrator. It's a little more tedious. although I think sometimes it can produce better results. So anyway, one last Revit issue that I wanted to talk about is what to do with the new stuff that you're bringing into the project. Like I mentioned before, it's really important never to delete things, but only to demolish them. And here in this particular view, this is, what am I in? I'm in the 3D, standard 3D view, I think, right? I don't really want to do much design. Let me go to a section view. Try, let's see this view here. Yeah, that goes through the mezzanine. First of all, when you're drawing new stuff, make absolutely sure that your phase filter and current phase are set correctly. Now in this case, I had mentioned earlier that the show previous and new phase filter is the one we typically do new design in. That's where we can demolish things. Remember the good old demolish tool. You can demolish in pretty much any view, just so long as the phase is set to new construction. You can't create something in the existing phase and demolish it at the same time. So it goes away. You can also, by the way, select an object and check its properties. And in its properties, see how it says the phase created? You can demolish it in the properties of the object. Just make sure you demolish it in the next phase down the line. And in the end, it has the same result. The element is not deleted. It just shows up in your demolition plans. Okay, the last thing I wanted to mention is when you create new objects, be sure, even if they're just a masked element, that you use the correct family for them. And this can lead to some problems if you're using SketchUp objects or if you're using objects imported from Form Fonts, or I'm sorry, from Revit City, which don't always comply with the family designation. So you might need to create a new family. Go to File, New, File, New Family, and be sure to choose the kind of family that makes sense for what you're doing. In this case, it's particularly important with doors and casework and furniture that they be assigned correctly. But the other thing, oops, let me just cancel that. The other thing that is important to choose correctly are things like flooring and ceilings. And the reason is they are common hosts for other types of objects. So for example, let's say I wanted to make, I don't know, an unusual ceiling for this first floor or for the upper floor. I could easily come in here and I'll go to Architecture, and under the Main Place Component button, there is a Model in Place feature. And you may be familiar with this. I can come in here and choose ceilings, for example, and click OK. And I can even call it, you know, ceiling under mezzanine. Okay, and we go into sketch mode. In sketch mode, I happen to be in section view because that's the view I want to think about this. So I might want to pick the plane that I draw, and I think I'll draw on this vertical plane here. See how it was highlighted. And now I can draw some funky ceiling here. Let's make it, let's see, feet here, and we'll just sketch a funky shape because I don't really have the patience to do anything beyond that. Anyway, we'll just, here we go. This is my strangely shaped ceiling. Okay, and like masses that we've created in other places, you know, you can fiddle around with them. But because this is a ceiling, I could easily put lighting into this object. When you click on it, it knows the category, the family type that it is, which is to say, it's a ceiling. Oh, I haven't finished it yet. Finish them all. There we go. Okay, now when I select it, Revit is smart and knows that this is a ceiling. Okay. Now, I would do the same for the floor in the second floor here. If you want to use something like stadium seating, that is typically a hosted element. So be sure to create the mezzanine floor construction, which will be tiered, so it will be sloped. Be sure to create that using some sort of either extrusion or mass to make your shape, and that way the floor, furniture will go directly into it. So the final element, which I believe we will talk about in class, is how do you handle things like these design sketches which you have been given. They can be a little fuzzy, of course, because they're sketches. Now, some things you're going to really have to just figure out. Now, for example, a 6-lane pool that's 25-yard competition length pool, I have posted the graphic standards that tells you the dimensions, the exact dimensions for that pool. Now there's a length, which is obviously a 25-yard pool probably wants to be 25 yards long, but the width is actually variable. There is a range for the lane width that you can work with. The same with some of these other elements. I have sketched in some toilet fixtures and some showers and some lockers with a bench. You do not have to draw exactly what I've drawn, because what I've drawn is only approximate. What you'll want to do is grab some toilet fixtures that are code compliant and see how they fit in the project. The same with shower stalls. There are typically, these are unitary shower stalls. They are kind of purchased as a single element. You'll want to check and see what fits in here and reconfigure as necessary. The job of the project manager is to figure out how to fit things in. For example, how big is a sauna? You'll need to find that out. Use your reference manuals, use the internet, or use Revit standard components to help you figure out during the schematic phase if all these elements are going to fit. So there you have it. Those are some basic guidelines for how to proceed with Revit and how far to go with your schematic design, and that hopefully you will find that helpful.